Welcome to Real Time Recorded. We're going to look today. Zeus and I are going to look back at Week 24. What did you think of Week 24, Zeus?
It was okay. We didn't have the news that we didn't have the big news that we did the week before with.
I love your optimism. One more week behind us, one more week closer to the grave. Yeah, whatever. But okay, so let's. The week started off Monday with big announcements from Google. Little confusing announcements from Google. With Google, it's always kind of a guess what the name of the app is you're using because they don't really add. They add names more than they add functionality. Put it that way. But the big news was they made Workspace apps free for all, which is a little confusing because most people had Workspace apps for free because they have docs and stuff like that. But so more accurately, what they did was they made Meet and Chat available to Gmail users, which actually just aligns the Google experience the same on the consumer side as on the business side, which makes perfect sense because that's, people on the consumer side are familiar with the apps and they use them at work and it's less training. So they got that all aligned, which also means they promised this, I think 3 years ago or 2 years ago, finally killing off Hangouts. A lot of people like Hangouts. People don't react to that differently, but Meet and Chat are a slightly upgraded version and they're separate apps. And now it's just more consistent. They upgraded chat with they already had DMs, it already had chat rooms. They're adding a thing called Spaces, which I assume are topics. I'm not 100% certain. Kind of positioning themselves more along Slack or Discord, enterprise team messaging. Let's just say it that way. So 2 key points that I want to raise, and then we'll see what Zeus has to say. But first point is this vision is very similar to what Microsoft is doing with Teams. The big difference, two big differences I want to call out. One is they're not doing it with a fat client. They're doing it completely web-based, and I think that's really important. They're doing it with backend microservices, which is the same as Microsoft, but they're doing it through a web browser UI, and they're with no client to install, and the exact same experience, whether you're on web, whether you're on Windows, whether you're on Linux, whether you're on Mac. I would consider that a more modern experience, not to say that they're ahead of Microsoft, because Microsoft's got some functionality that Google doesn't have, but I think it's a very different approach. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is that very different from Microsoft is that Google's doing this from an email-centric point of view. And so everything is, you're on your email page or Gmail page, whatever you want to call it, and you've got your chat, you've got your video, you've got your calendar, everything right there, where Microsoft is kind of combining all those services into one in Teams, except for email. Now you can integrate with to Exchange, but it's a separate service. So very different philosophies, but I think they're kind of moving along the same direction. Zeus?
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about the renaming of the Google stuff. Whenever I hear of Google and what they're doing with Hangouts, chats, Workspace, whatever, I think back to my days at Yankee Group, where if you know the founder of Barstool Sports, Dave Portnoy, he used to be a sales guy at Yankee Group, and his sales strategy was always controlled confusion. And because if you control the confusion, you can sell things. And I think that's what a lot of times I think that's what Google's trying to do. They just rename things, repackage them, and people just wind up adopting stuff. With that being said, though, I think your point on the client list, the browser-based, is important. Microsoft, by their own admission, really have not done a good job on the browser-based version of it. And every time I complain to somebody at Microsoft about how bad the browser-based version of Teams is, they said, just install the client. I'm like, but I don't want to install the client. The whole point of having a browserless experience is to not install the client.
And people like me, I use a Chromebook when I travel, and so the Microsoft experience on a Chromebook is not as good as on the PC.
No. And I did like some of the new packaging they had. Where there's a free version now for business users. There's a single entrepreneur version. I think they're the first company to actually address the company of one. Right, folks like you and I, that you can buy everything through, one license now and have access to that without having to commit to a much bigger bundle. The other thing they announced was some security updates, and it took me a while to understand what they were doing, but they introduced something called client-side encryption for Workspace, and it gives their customers direct control of the encryption keys. And the key here is that, pardon the pun, is that the data becomes indecipherable to Google itself. So everybody accuses Google of spying on us, but they're actually putting things in place where they can't actually see the data. And I think that is something that's pretty interesting that they're doing. Historically, they handle the encryption keys and they alone, and I think they've flipped that around. So I don't know, Dave. With Google, Google's always on the verge, it seems, of breaking out and becoming the next big collaboration vendor. And they've never really managed to do that outside of some.
Well, that's not true. Yes, they are the next big collaboration vendor. It's just kind of a big gap. That's all. But
yeah, I will say that I think their products are much better than their market share reflects. I actually think that the Google Suite's much better than the Microsoft Suite.
Well, I've definitely noticed I'm
work.
getting a lot more Meet links and meetings requests than I used to. I mean, now that Meet is free to everybody, and I'm getting a lot more than I used to. So I haven't done studied it, but I would assume that their market share is notching up a little bit. But
I just like to see them be a little more consistent and stop rechanging names and things like that. I think it creates some confusion because I do think their product's actually pretty good. And some consistency there and some consistent go-to effort would actually help them go a long way. But, I think the email-centric thing's interesting, too, because how long have we been hearing the death of email, right? And it always winds up being the fallback, right? And so, I think they're living in the real world where people still do rely heavily on email, and if they want to do that, use that as the central focal point for what you do, which most people do. And, we'll see if email goes away, but I think Dave, by the time email goes away, you and I will long be in.
Well, at least you will be. I plan to survive. Okay, well, let's move on to another. Since we're talking about Microsoft anyway, Microsoft announced at the end of the week a bunch of improvements around their hybrid office commitment. Hybrid, of course, is the new term for telecommuting. The difference is that hybrid office is more about the office and community, where telecommuting is more of a personalized experience, what people individually needed to do. And I think it's important. I think, and we're going to be hearing this a lot from a lot of different vendors, from every vendor probably, about how they're repositioning around the hybrid office. So they made two announcements in their meeting room category in particular that I wanted to highlight. One of them was that they announced that Neat will now be certified for Microsoft Teams meetings. I guess it's not too surprising, but it's big news. I mean, Neat's only, 2.5 years old. They launched at Zoomtopia, and they were the only company in the space that was optimized and designed for the Zoom experience. And so they've been very focused on Zoom only. They've had a spectacular ride because Zoom had such a great year during the pandemic, and they've seen some significant growth. But they are single-purpose hardware, and that's getting to be less popular these days. And so by lining up with Microsoft, or Microsoft lining up with Neat, they're increasing their total their TAM, total available market. They're giving their customers more choice and flexibility, reuse their hardware different ways. Microsoft probably sees it as a way of recruiting some of those vendors, those customers, and a lot of customers will see it as a more logical hardware acquisition since it doesn't lock them in. So I think it's a big win for Microsoft. I think it's a big win for Neat. But for Microsoft, they're getting their stronger ecosystem. They're giving their customers more choice. And I have to say the Neat equipment is very elegant. Probably not so good for Poly and Logi, but different ways to look at that. Microsoft tends to add more slices to their partner pie as the partner pie gets bigger. And so you could conclude, the casual observer might say that Logi and Poly are not doing well, and Microsoft needs to add another partner. But I think more realistically, they're doing so well that Microsoft wants to divvy up the pie a little bit more. And that's going to be tough for Logi and Poly because Neat's a tough competitor, very elegant stuff. Impact to Zoom, probably neutral. Be curious what Zeus thinks about that. And one other thing I want to highlight is that most of the investors behind Neat all came out of Cisco. And it just goes to show how the importance of retention. Zeus?
Yeah. Well, and they all came from Tamron before that. So, and in fact, OJ Wings, the CEO, he said, the only good devices ever invented were invented in Oslo. So, but that's not totally true. I don't really think there's any impact to Zoom. I actually don't think there's a whole lot of impact to Poly and Logi either. I think Teams is a rising tide. I think they've, the pandemic, just created a massive wave of customers that leveraged the O365 license and started to deploy Teams. I think it's a much bigger deal for Neat than it is Teams. Neat's pretty small. I can't imagine their run rate's very big at all, given they're only 2.5 years old. But it's a good feather in their cap, and it does legitimize them. I think with Zoom, Eric was an investor in it, so it made some sense that they would partner with it. But this Microsoft,
I bet you Neat changes their website, because you go to the Neat website now, there's a video of Eric talking, and so I have a feeling that might change. But
yeah, I do find Microsoft's strategy around devices, though. It depends on your opinion. So I had a Twitter exchange last night with Ilya Buchtian, he leads the Microsoft devices, and we were sort of discussing this. And I've always felt that Microsoft stifles innovation on the device side because they come out with these reference architectures and every device manufacturer looks the same. His point is that customers want to have a similar experience, whether the device is Logi, Poly, Neat, or Crestron. My point is that you should let the vendors be the vendors, and a Poly Teams room should be different than a Neat Teams room, should be different than a Logi team room, and then it's up to the customer to pick what they want. Microsoft's philosophy is we're going to make them all look the same. And while I understand the logic behind that, I think they are holding the vendors back. And I'd like to see Microsoft open that up a little more and let the vendors do what the vendors do. I don't think they'll do that, but I think they would actually drive faster innovation into their room ecosystem if they did that.
And then the final topic, also related to the Microsoft hybrid announcement, was that Poly announced a new type of device. Actually, it's a very, very nice looking device. What is the name of it? Is Zeus? It's an E something. I have to look it up. Sorry about that. But it is a two cameras on it, one tele, one zoom and one wide view. And it does some really advanced tricks. Those two cameras can work together. They can switch between them, work together, and so there's no real moving parts. The pan tilt thing is all gone. It's all software based. I think they're talking about doing like a conversation mode where you can have two people at the same table, like talking to each other with the two different cameras. So really interesting stuff going on there. Very nice wide mic array. Now, a lot of these devices are called video bars. This is more of a video wing, and the difference is there's no speaker in it. And so you've got the two cameras, and you've got the mic array, and the wing gives a pretty nice distance on the mic array, so it can do more advanced sound capabilities. But you're going to have to do a different kind of solution for speakers. This is a USB device. It requires a codec. And so in the Microsoft environment, they'll package it, no doubt, with the Lenovo PC. I'm sure it'll be coming to the Neat environment with an Android-based solution. And we didn't really talk about that, Zeus, on the Neat and the Poly. Both companies have Android-based meeting rooms, and Microsoft kind of treats those a little differently than they do with their MTR, their Windows-based solutions. Maybe you can touch on that just briefly. And while you talk about that, I'm going to find out the model number of that Polycom device, or that Poly device.
Yeah, it's the E70.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's this is what Poly does, right? Poly cut their teeth historically making good room systems. They made another one here. I go back and forth on these USB connected devices that require a PC. It adds a little bit of complexity in that you need to have that PC in place, but it does bring the cost way down. So, I guess different deployments for different use cases. I will say in this world that we're moving into with a hybrid workplace, we are going to see more of these type devices in rooms. I think they've added a lot of features to it, like you mentioned the gallery view and things like that, that make that experience much more personal for people on the remote end. But overall, I thought it was, a good announcement for Poly. I certainly don't think it's a game-changing device or anything like that, but, it does show that Poly's innovation is continuing, particularly in the areas that they're strong in. So it would have been easy for the company to over-rotate to headsets and work-from-home type of devices and things like that, but clearly they've been working on this for a while, and this I think, will pay some dividends as people start to go back to work.
Yeah, I want to clarify my fumble there. It's you're right, the E70, but it's the Poly Studio E70, and I should also say that the two cameras are 20 megapixel each. 4K sensors on those things, and so pretty high-end device. And I think it's a really interesting device from Poly. It's very different than anything else we've seen from Poly. I think,
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I do think that they did a good job when Tom Puro was leading devices there. He did a good job of creating a single operating system across all the devices. And we should expect to see more devices faster from Poly moving forward. I think historically, all the multiple software streams held them back. And I think now that they consolidated all of that, Tom did a nice job with that. I do think we'll start to see some faster innovation out of Poly, which is good for that company. They went through a lot of changes there with CEOs and corporate strategy and things like that. But I think they should start to roll now. Okay, well that wraps up week 24 of Real Time Recorded. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to click the subscribe, and Dave and I will be back for maybe week 25, although it is the 4th of July holiday, so maybe week 26. But either way, we'll see you then.